Number 6. The SS America. On July 2, 1978, around 3 a.m., people aboard the SS America sensed their journey was doomed. From the beginning, things were uneasy. Just 9 hours before, about 900 passengers gathered at a pier in Manhattan. They all had problems with their tickets. Some couldn't find their name on the manifest, while others paid but never received their tickets. The ship was running late, and everyone was ordered to get on board, with or without tickets. In 1978, life in New York wasn't a fairy tale. The crime rate was high, and the economy was in trouble. Venture Cruise Lines claimed that their ocean liner, the SS America, was being restored. This interested many locals who were in need of a summer escape. The cruise line guaranteed that guests would be pampered endlessly, but the real attraction was the price. 2 nights on the ocean started at $99. It was almost too good to be true. A lot of passengers noticed that their cabins were flooded by faulty plumbing once on board. If one was lucky enough to get a mattress, it usually lacked sheets. Some passengers weren't so lucky and had no mattress at all. On top of that, toilets didn't flush. There were also plenty of cockroaches and rats. One passenger said that the SS America was a big, floating garbage can. At least 100 paying customers never found cabins at all. They gathered outside the purser's office, homeless at sea, and began yelling, "We want to get off!" The situation quickly got worse. Some of the angrier customers physically fought with the crew. Harbor police had to be called. By this point, the SS America was anchored near Coney Island, where the captain gave in to the angry mob's demands. 250 passengers flew down rope ladders once the ship's doors opened. From there, the tugboats dropped them off on Staten Island and left. They were promised limo rides home after the cruise finished, but it never happened. The next day, the tabloids ate the story up. It made the front page of the Daily News with a headline, "Dream Cruise Like a Nautical Nightmare." It retold in detail the many discomforts of the cruise. After being pressed for a comment, a representative for Venture simply stated, "We goofed," which left much to be desired. Aside from the fact that the Venture's goof was the product of a company with zero business managing ocean liners, it bizarrely took place on board what had formerly been one of New York's most distinguished ships. Number 5. Krakatoa. On May 20th, 1883, Krakatoa showed signs of activity for the first time in over 200 years. A 7-mile-high ash and dust cloud was seen over Krakatoa, according to a German warship passing by. Commercial liners and locals would see similar explosions for the next 2 months. Locals welcomed the volcanic activity with delight, but they had little to no knowledge of the upcoming disaster. On August 26th and 27th, excitement turned to horror as Krakatoa blew itself apart, setting off a chain of natural disasters that would be felt around the world for years to come. On August 26th, an enormous blast destroyed almost 2/3 of the northern island. As it plunged into the Sunda Strait between the Java Sea and the Indian Ocean, the gushing mountain sent out a series of pyroclastic flows and tsunamis that quickly swept over neighboring coastlines. The next day, around 5:30 a.m., there were 4 more catastrophic eruptions. At least 31,000 of the estimated 36,000 deaths from the eruption were brought on by the tsunamis. The largest of these waves, which rose to 120 feet, swept over surrounding islands, destroying vegetation and tossing people out to sea. According to other sources, another 4,500 people were killed by pyroclastic flows that swept over the sea over 40 miles away. Have you ever visited a volcano? Tell us in the comments below and hit subscribe while you're at it. At number 4, the USS Forrestal. The USS Forrestal frequently conducted combat missions during the Vietnam War while stationed off the coast of North Vietnam. On July 29, 1967, the ship was preparing for an assault when one of its F-4 Phantom jet fighters unintentionally released a rocket. An A-4 Skyhawk jet was struck by the missile as it sped over the deck. The future Arizona Senator John McCain was inside the Skyhawk as he was waiting for takeoff. The jet's fuel started to leak and caught fire. It quickly spread to surrounding planes on the ship's deck, where it exploded a 1,000-pound bomb, killing countless first responders and escalating the blaze. The flight deck was destroyed by the explosions, and at one point the entire ship was ablaze. As the fire progressed, many pilots were trapped in their planes. Sadly, an entire day went by before it was under control. The horrific fire killed 134 sailors while leaving hundreds more injured. 20 aircraft were also destroyed. Since World War II, it was the worst disaster on a U.S. Navy vessel. Before the Forrestal returned to Virginia, temporary repairs were done to the ship. The following April, it was repaired and put back into use. After narrowly escaping the fire, John McCain offered to serve on the USS Oriskany. 3 months later, over North Vietnam, his jet was shot down and he was taken prisoner. He was held as a POW for 5.5 years and was finally sent back home in 1973. Number 3. The Estonia. On September 28, 1994, the Estonia, a sizable car and passenger ferry, sank in the Baltic Sea, causing one of the biggest maritime catastrophes of the century with 852 deaths. The German-built ship sank off the coast of Finland during an overnight trip from Tallinn, Estonia to Stockholm, Sweden. Sweden's citizens often traveled to Estonia, a former Soviet republic that achieved its freedom in 1991. The ship was a ro-ro, or round-trip ferry that had a buffet, live music, dancing, and alcohol. Passengers could also drive their cars onto one end of the ship and off the other. The Estonia sank after hitting bad weather, with waves reaching up to 15 to 20 feet. Many people were trapped on the boat, and even those who made it to lifeboats eventually died from hypothermia or drowning. The majority of the 137 survivors were rescued by helicopters. The tragedy was deemed accidental by a joint Swedish-Finnish-Estonian government commission, which linked the accident to water flooding through an open bow door and into the Estonia's vehicle deck, weakening the ship and causing it to capsize. There were many others, including family and friends, who weren't convinced that it was merely bad weather. They believed it was because of a hole in the boat, perhaps caused by a collision or explosion. At number 2, the Potemkin Mutiny. The Potemkin Mutiny, which started out as a disagreement over food, ended up being a key moment in the 1905 Russian Revolution. When 700 crew members from the Potemkin battleship were handed rations of borscht cooked from maggot-infested beef, a riot broke out. The sailors resisted when they were told to eat the poison stew or risk a penalty. Afancy Matyashenko, a revolutionary mariner, was the head of the crew, who engaged Potemkin and the torpedo boat Ismail in a brutal gunfight, causing the deaths of over half the ship's officers. The Black Sea Fleet of Russia was quickly assembled to punish the sailors, but its men were sympathetic to the cause and didn't open fire. Before ultimately turning over the battleship in Romania, Matyashenko and his men sailed for 11 days. Several crew members, notably Matyashenko, eventually returned to Russia, only to be detained and sentenced to death. The majority of the crew members continued to live in exile. The Potemkin Mutiny had a big impact on the 1917 revolution that formed the foundation of the Soviet Union and was memorialized in the 1925 silent movie Battleship Potemkin. And at number 1, the Morrow Castle disaster. In August of 1930, the SS Morrow Castle set sail for the first time, starting a 4-year career as a passenger ship between New York and Havana. The 508-foot-long ocean liner was named after the castle overlooking Havana Bay. It gave 489 paying passengers the chance to escape prohibition and the Depression and live in a never-ending alcohol-fueled party at sea. The Castle Morrow set out from Havana on September 5, 1934 to New York. The ship met strong gusts and received warnings of an approaching storm as it sailed north. On the night of September 7th, Captain Robert Wilmot reported stomach discomfort after dinner. He was later found dead in his room from what seemed to be a heart attack. Despite the captain's death, the Castle Morrow continued to steam through the high seas when Chief Officer William Worms took over. On September 8th at 2:50 in the morning, a fire started in a storage locker on B deck. The crew's efforts to put out the blaze and send out an SOS were hampered by the high winds, which spread the flames through the elaborate wood interior. Many of the crew members left the ship when it was evident the fire could not be put out. They left the unskilled and terrified passengers to fight for themselves. Without any guidance, passengers stumbled through the darkness and heavy smoke. Many jumped into the ocean to escape the flames since they couldn't find a lifeboat. Because they had not been told to hang on to their life jackets after leaping, several of them fractured their necks or were knocked unconscious as they hit the water. The SOS was not quickly answered by rescue ships. They had trouble navigating the rough seas to find survivors. The Jersey shore quickly filled with people after the news of the disaster spread. They were there to help the survivors and victims in the lifeboats. The next morning, a few hundred feet from the Convention Hall Pier in Asbury Park, New Jersey, the empty, flaming ship ran aground. 86 passengers and 49 staff members were killed out of the 549 people on board. Officials soon started their investigation into the fire and how it started, along with why the crew failed to put it out. Meanwhile, the wreck became a popular tourist attraction and was decked out with postcards and stamped pennies. Almost every surface was either veneered wood or paint. The fire doors were useless. The water system lacked enough pressure to run more than a few hydrants at once. The fire alarms could not be heard. Not surprisingly, the crew's response to the incident was disorganized and not very competent. Captain Worm's hasty choice to continue on, knowing there was a storm ahead, was also judged. Only 6 of the 12 lifeboats were lowered because passengers had not been educated on emergency procedures. On top of that, the fact that there was a mystery still remained. How did the fire start, and how did the captain even die? Investigators saw that the crew was unhappy with their working conditions and that the captain was paranoid about mutineers and traitors. George W. Rogers, the head radio engineer, was in the limelight following the catastrophe. He was dubbed a hero for being one of the only crew members that stayed on the ship to help in the rescue effort. He has presented his narrative in several interviews and even performed it on Broadway. His co-workers always thought he was peculiar and unpleasant, and it was later revealed that he had a shady past. Before working on the Morrow, he had been fired from a job for stealing equipment, and he was a suspect in a strange fire too. Rogers tried to start a radio repair shop after the Morrow Castle tragedy, but it failed. It also mysteriously burned down. He became employed by the Bayonne Police Department shortly after as a radio assistant. Lieutenant Vincent Doyle didn't feel right about Rogers, so he badgered him about what really happened with the castle. Later, in March of 1938, Doyle agreed to fix a fish tank heater after Rogers claimed it needed some repairs. The man was nearly killed when it exploded after he plugged it in. After this, Rogers received a prison sentence of 12 to 20 years for attempted murder. In 1942, he was granted parole to fight in World War II, but after hearing about his past, the military would not allow it. Crime continued to follow him, and he was once again sent to prison in 1954 after killing a friend and his daughter who had loaned him money. His sentence was short-lived since he died 4 years later. There was never enough proof to link the accused arsonist and convicted killer to the Morrow Castle accident, but many have their beliefs. Some suspect the captain was poisoned by Rogers before setting the ship on fire. Others believe that the captain's death was merely a tragic coincidence and that the fire was the outcome of an insurance scandal carried out by Rogers after he was hired by the steamship company. A few people even suggested Rogers was an informant and the ship was smuggling arms to Cuban rebels. Whatever the reason, the incident prompted the introduction of stricter marine safety regulations, including the use of fire-retardant materials, enhanced fire doors and alarms, as well as more emergency training for crew and passengers. Thanks for watching. Have you ever heard of any of these disasters before? Tell us in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.